Welcome to the Secret Love Story channel, where we explore emotional love and family stories together. Today, we will embark on a new journey, where every moment of love and the challenges of family life will be shared honestly and deeply. Let's embrace these wonderful feelings. There are those who leave you with wounds, but there are also those who leave and teach you valuable lessons. I once loved a girl, but that love shattered when she decided to break up simply because I wasn't well off enough. One day, while waiting at the bank, I suddenly saw a familiar figure. She was standing there, hand in hand with someone new, her eyes full of happiness. Can I remain calm when faced with the painful past? And what will happen when I meet the one who broke my heart? Let's find out. Let's embrace these wonderful feelings. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new information. Alex Carter walked into the large, bustling lobby of Kensington Bank, the quiet confidence in his stride catching the attention of those around him. He was no longer the boy people once pitied or gossiped about. He was a man who had fought his way back from the brink, but none of that was visible on the surface as he made his way toward the bank's private offices. His expression was calm, composed, just another man going about his business. But to those who had known him years ago, there was a distinct air of power and success about him now, the kind that turned heads. Among those watching was Grace Mitchell, seated at one of the plush chairs near the front, sipping a cappuccino with her new boyfriend, Ryan Morgan. Grace spotted Alex the moment he walked through the door. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, recognizing him instantly, but she quickly masked her surprise with a smirk. "Look who it is," she said, nudging Ryan's arm. "Alex Carter. Still around, it seems." Ryan, oblivious to their history, glanced up casually. "Who?" "An old acquaintance," Grace replied, her voice dripping with condescension. She watched Alex approach, her smirk growing. "Looks like he's still trying to make it. Probably looking for a job or something." Ryan chuckled, eager to impress Grace. "Really? Well, he does have that just scraping by look about him." He leaned back in his chair, eyeing Alex with a mocking grin. "You know, Grace, not everyone can maintain their status after high school. Some people just fall behind." As Alex neared their table, Grace couldn't resist. "Alex," she called out, her voice loud enough to ensure he heard. "It's been a long time. What brings you here?" Alex stopped, turning to face her. His expression remained neutral, betraying nothing of the memories that flashed through his mind, memories of Grace and the life they once shared. He hadn't seen her in years, and the woman sitting before him now, dripping in designer labels, was a far cry from the girl he had once known. "Just here on business," Alex replied calmly, his tone polite but distant. He had no intention of engaging in whatever game Grace was playing. Grace raised an eyebrow, exchanging a glance with Ryan. "Business, huh? Still trying to find your footing, I suppose." Ryan, picking up on Grace's mocking tone, jumped in. "Yeah, it must be tough. You know, climbing your way up from wherever it is you are now." Alex's eyes flicked briefly to Ryan, taking in the man's smug expression, but he didn't bite. There was no need to prove anything to them, least of all to Grace. Instead, he simply nodded once, a faint smile on his lips. "You could say that." Grace leaned back in her chair, satisfied with what she assumed was Alex's quiet defeat. "Well, I'm sure you'll find something eventually, Alex," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Good luck." Alex remained composed, his expression unchanged as he met her gaze. "Thanks," he said quietly, before turning and walking away. As he headed toward the private offices, Alex didn't spare another glance in their direction. He had no reason to. Grace could mock him all she wanted, but it didn't matter anymore. The boy she had once discarded was gone. The man who stood in his place had long since moved past the need for her approval or anyone else's. Behind him, Grace watched Alex's retreating figure, her smirk fading slightly. Ryan, still unaware of the significance of their exchange, shrugged it off, turning his attention back to his phone. But Grace couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about Alex, something she hadn't expected. As Alex continued through the lobby, he was greeted warmly by several bank employees, all of whom recognized him immediately. His arrival had not gone unnoticed by John Morgan, the president of Kensington Bank, who hurried out of his office to meet him. "Mr. Carter," John said, his voice full of warmth and respect as he approached Alex. "It's always a pleasure to see you. We weren't expecting you today." Alex shook John's hand, nodding politely. "Just here for a quick meeting, John." "Good to see you." Ryan, still seated with Grace, overheard the exchange and frowned, his earlier amusement giving way to confusion. "Wait," he muttered under his breath, leaning closer to Grace. "Did he just say Mr. Carter? As in Carter Systems?" Grace's face paled slightly as the realization hit her. She had spent years dismissing Alex after their breakup, assuming he had faded into obscurity along with his family's fortune. But now, hearing his name spoken with such reverence, it became clear that Alex hadn't just survived, he had thrived. "Yes," Grace whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's him." Ryan stared after Alex, his earlier mockery replaced by a growing sense of unease. He had no idea that the man he had just taunted was the CEO of a company that held immense influence in the tech industry, and one of the bank's most important clients. As Alex finished his conversation with John and headed toward the private offices, he paused for a moment, turning slightly to glance back at Grace and Ryan. His expression remained calm, but there was a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. Without a word, he turned and disappeared into the bank's executive wing, leaving Grace and Ryan to sit in their uncomfortable realization. For Alex, the encounter had been nothing more than a brief moment in an otherwise ordinary day. But for Grace and Ryan, it was a stark reminder that the world had a way of turning the tables, and the people you least expect often end up on top. Years ago, Alex and Grace had been inseparable. High school sweethearts, they were the golden couple everyone admired. Both came from prestigious families, and their relationship was seen as an ideal match. Alex, the charming son of a tech mogul, and Grace, the stunning daughter of real estate giants, were the envy of their peers. Their lives were filled with lavish parties, weekend trips to exclusive resorts, and dinners at high-end restaurants. It all seemed perfect, almost too perfect. Their bond appeared unbreakable, cemented by shared experiences of luxury and wealth. At school, they were often voted most likely to succeed and were always the center of attention. Grace reveled in this spotlight, and Alex, while quieter, found comfort in the ease with which everything fell into place. Their future together seemed certain, two people destined to continue the legacies of their powerful families. But in an instant, that dream was shattered. One afternoon, Alex's world came crashing down. His father's company, Carter Systems, was the target of a massive cyber attack. The breach was catastrophic, wiping out sensitive client data, and with it, the trust of their most important partners. Overnight, the company's value plummeted, and the financial stability that Alex had always taken for granted disappeared. The Carter family, once a pillar of wealth, was left scrambling to prevent complete ruin. As news of the attack spread, the vultures of high society circled, eager to see the mighty fall. Suddenly, Alex was no longer the golden boy, he was a cautionary tale, the son of a fallen empire. Gossip spread like wildfire, with speculation about the company's future and the impact on the Carter family's fortune. For Alex, the hardest blow wasn't the loss of wealth, but the swift unraveling of his personal life. Grace, who had always been by his side, began to pull away. She wasn't overt about it at first, small comments, the sudden cancellation of plans, but Alex felt the shift. He had always known that Grace valued status, but he had never believed that it would come between them. Then, one evening, just days after the cyber attack, Grace made her position clear. They were sitting in her car after a dinner that had been tense and uncomfortable. Alex had been trying to figure out how to navigate this new reality, but Grace had other things on her mind. "I just don't see how this is going to work anymore, Alex," she said, her voice devoid of the warmth it once held. She didn't look at him as she spoke, her eyes fixed on the city lights outside. "This situation isn't what I signed up for. I can't be with someone whose family is struggling." The words hit Alex like a punch to the gut. He had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud was another matter entirely. He looked at her, searching for some sign of the girl he thought he knew, but all he saw was cold calculation. Grace wasn't breaking up with him because they had grown apart, or because they wanted different things. She was leaving because his family was no longer wealthy. To her, he was no longer a valuable asset. "Grace, this isn't permanent," Alex had tried to reason, though deep down, he knew it was futile. "We'll rebuild. It's just a setback." But Grace wasn't interested in setbacks. She was interested in maintaining her image, in staying within the elite circles that had always accepted her with open arms. And Alex, now the son of a failed businessman, was no longer part of that world. "I can't risk my future, Alex," she said, her voice steely. "I need to think about what's best for me." With that, it was over. Grace walked away, leaving Alex to grapple with the full weight of his family's downfall, now utterly alone. The betrayal cut deeper than he had expected, but it also ignited something within him, a determination to prove her, and everyone else, wrong. Alex channeled his pain into action. At just 17, he made the bold decision to leave high school and join his father's company, vowing to help rebuild it from the ground up. It wasn't an easy choice, and his friends and teachers thought he was making a mistake, but Alex knew he couldn't stand by and watch his father's life's work crumble. He had to take responsibility, to show that he was more than just a privileged kid born into wealth. His father, though hesitant at first, eventually welcomed Alex into the company. From day one, Alex faced an uphill battle. Clients were angry, and investors were pulling out left and right. The company's name had been tarnished, and Alex, as young as he was, found himself on the receiving end of harsh criticism from those who no longer trusted the Carter name. But instead of being discouraged, he used their doubts as motivation. He worked tirelessly, learning the business from the ground up. While his peers were planning for prom and graduation, Alex was in boardrooms and meetings, trying to salvage what was left of Carter systems. His father became his mentor, teaching him the nuances of leadership and business strategy, and slowly, they began to make progress. The road was long and difficult, but Alex's resolve never wavered. Years passed, and Alex's dedication paid off. Carter Systems not only recovered but emerged stronger than ever. By the time he was in his early 20s, Alex had taken over as CEO, a position he had earned through sheer determination and hard work. The company's success was no longer a result of his family's legacy but of his own vision and leadership. Now, standing in the lobby of Kensington Bank, Alex felt the weight of those years lift from his shoulders. He had rebuilt his life, not for Grace, not for anyone else, but for himself and his family. And that was enough. At 17, Alex stepped into a world that most teenagers would find overwhelming. Instead of worrying about prom or college applications, he was thrust into the high-stakes realm of corporate survival. The weight of his father's company, Carter Systems, now rested heavily on his young shoulders, and the responsibility was immense. The company had lost not only its reputation but also the trust of clients and investors. They were teetering on the edge of complete collapse, and every decision felt like it could be the final nail in the coffin. Alex's first few months at the company were brutal. He was met with skepticism at every turn. Clients who had once treated the Carter family with respect and admiration now looked at him with disdain, as if his mere presence was a reminder of the company's failure. Partners who had stood by his father for years suddenly became cold and distant, unwilling to risk their own reputations by associating with a sinking ship. But Alex refused to be discouraged. He had made a promise to himself and to his family that he would not let the company die. Every insult, every dismissive comment only fueled his resolve. He spent long hours at the office, learning everything he could about the business. He studied financial reports, analyzed market trends, and sat in on every meeting his father had. When his father wasn't available, Alex would turn to the company's senior executives for guidance, absorbing their advice like a sponge. His father, James Carter, despite his own exhaustion from the crisis, was a constant source of support. He didn't coddle Alex, though. Instead, he pushed him to take on real responsibilities, believing that it was the only way for him to grow. James knew that the road ahead would be hard, but he also knew that his son had the potential to rise to the occasion. In time, Alex began to take on more significant roles within the company. At first, it was simple tasks, sitting in on client meetings, handling paperwork, and learning the ropes. But soon, he was tasked with negotiating small deals and rebuilding relationships with minor partners. These were often the clients who had been the first to jump ship when the cyber attack hit, but Alex saw them as opportunities. If he could win them back, even in small ways, it would be a step toward restoring the company's reputation. It wasn't easy. Many of these former clients treated Alex with open disdain. They remembered the collapse and blamed his family for their own financial losses. But Alex, always composed and patient, never let their hostility shake him. He listened to their concerns, acknowledged their frustrations, and slowly began to regain their trust. His determination to prove them wrong became his driving force. As the months turned into years, Alex's role in the company grew. He was no longer the inexperienced teenager trying to fill his father's shoes. He had become a capable leader in his own right. His father, recognizing this growth, began to step back, allowing Alex to take control of more significant decisions. One of Alex's earliest successes was securing a major contract with a tech firm that had been wary of doing business with Carter Systems after the cyber attack. It was a risky move, and one that many in the company doubted would pay off. But Alex's careful negotiations, combined with his willingness to offer favorable terms, sealed the deal. It was a turning point for the company, signaling to the industry that Carter Systems was on its way back. Over time, Alex became known for his relentless work ethic and his ability to handle pressure. He wasn't just rebuilding a company, he was rebuilding its reputation, one client at a time. Every deal he secured, every relationship he mended, was a testament to his dedication and vision. His name, once synonymous with failure, now carried a new weight. Alex Carter was no longer just the son of a disgraced businessman, he was a force to be reckoned with in the tech industry. By the time Alex was in his early 20s, he had earned the respect of those around him. Clients who had once dismissed him as too young and inexperienced now came to him for advice. Partners who had abandoned Carter Systems during its darkest days now sought his approval. Under his leadership, the company not only survived but began to thrive. The lessons Alex had learned about responsibility, resilience, and the importance of never giving up had transformed him into the leader his father had always believed he could be. Looking back, Alex knew that the hardships he had faced had been necessary. The pain of Grace's betrayal, the humiliation of being treated like an outsider in the world he had grown up in, and the crushing weight of his family's near ruin had shaped him into someone stronger, someone who could handle the challenges of life without flinching. He had proven to himself, and to everyone who had doubted him, that he was capable of more than anyone had expected. Alex continued his confident stride toward the private offices of Kensington Bank, leaving Grace and Ryan in stunned silence behind him. His presence commanded the space, drawing the attention of those around him, but he remained unfazed by the curious glances. His mind was clear, focused on the task at hand, and the scene with Grace and Ryan had already faded into the background. As he approached the entrance to the executive suites, a familiar face appeared. John Morgan, the bank's president, hurried toward him with an outstretched hand, his expression one of warmth and admiration. John had always held Alex in high regard, having seen firsthand the remarkable turnaround of Carter Systems under Alex's leadership. "Mr. Carter," John greeted him with genuine enthusiasm. "It's always a pleasure to see you. We weren't expecting you today, but it's a welcome surprise." Alex shook John's hand, offering a polite smile in return. "Good to see you too, John. I'm just here for a quick meeting. Nothing too time-consuming." John beamed, clearly pleased to have Alex at the bank, even for a short visit. "I understand. Still, it's always good to have you here. The team appreciates your business and continued support." Alex nodded, acknowledging the sentiment without lingering on it. Business was business, after all, and he wasn't one for empty flattery. He had come to Kensington Bank with a purpose, and his mind was set on accomplishing it. But as John continued to chat, the reality of Alex's success began to dawn on Ryan, who was still seated a short distance away with Grace. Ryan's smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of confusion that slowly morphed into disbelief. He had just mocked Alex, thinking he was a nobody, yet here he was, receiving deferential treatment from the president of the bank. Ryan leaned closer to Grace, his voice low but urgent. "Who exactly is Alex Carter?" he asked, his earlier bravado now replaced with uncertainty. Grace, still reeling from her own embarrassment, could barely meet his gaze. She had never anticipated running into Alex like this, and certainly not in such a powerful position. "He's the CEO of Carter Systems," she muttered, her voice barely audible. "His family's company. I didn't think. I didn't know." Her words trailed off, the weight of her mistake sinking in. Ryan's eyes widened in shock as he processed the revelation. Alex Carter, the man he had so easily dismissed as a commoner, was in fact the head of a major tech company, one that held significant influence over the bank's operations. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the earlier confidence he had displayed now completely gone. Meanwhile, Grace sat in silence, her thoughts racing. She hadn't seen Alex in years, and in that time, she had assumed he had faded into obscurity after the collapse of his father's company. But now, seeing him here, so composed, so successful, she couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. The boy she had once loved, the boy she had abandoned when things got tough, had transformed into a man of immense power and influence. And she had been too short-sighted to see it. Across the lobby, Alex, still engaged in conversation with John Morgan, glanced briefly in their direction. He could feel their eyes on him, but he didn't acknowledge it. He had no interest in confronting Grace or Ryan directly. The past was the past, and he had moved on from it. But as the conversation with John came to a close, Alex decided to make a point before he left. "I appreciate everything Kensington has done for us, John," Alex said, his tone professional but firm. "However, I think it's time I reevaluate where my business is placed. I've had some unpleasant experiences today that have made me question whether this bank is still the right fit for Carter Systems." John's smile faltered, confusion crossing his face. "Unpleasant experiences? I'm sorry to hear that, Alex. I wasn't aware." Alex raised a hand, cutting him off gently. "It's not something that requires further discussion. I'll be in touch with your office soon. For now, I have other matters to attend to." John, realizing the gravity of Alex's words, nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Carter. Please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything we can do to resolve any issues." With that, Alex gave a final nod and turned on his heel, walking out of the bank with the same quiet confidence with which he had entered. As he passed Grace and Ryan once more, he didn't stop or acknowledge them. There was no need to. His actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. Ryan and Grace watched him go, both of them now fully aware of the magnitude of their earlier mistake. Ryan, still stunned by the realization of Alex's true identity, looked at Grace for some kind of explanation, but she had none to give. She simply sat there, her face pale, her earlier arrogance replaced by shame and regret. Alex, meanwhile, stepped out into the crisp air, feeling the weight of the encounter lift from his shoulders. He hadn't come to the bank expecting to see Grace, nor had he planned to remind her of the decisions she had made all those years ago. But now that the moment had passed, he couldn't deny the sense of closure it had brought him. He had rebuilt his life, his family's company, and his future, not for Grace, not for anyone else, but for himself. And in the end, that was all that mattered. A few months passed after Alex's encounter with Grace and Ryan at the bank. He had not given the incident much thought since then, focusing instead on his company and its ever-growing success. But one morning, his assistant informed him of an unusual request. Grace Mitchell had reached out, asking for a private meeting. The name gave him pause. For a brief moment, memories of their past flooded his mind, the breakup, her cold indifference, and the years he spent rebuilding his life without her. He hadn't expected to hear from her again, and certainly not in a professional capacity. Alex leaned back in his office chair, contemplating what her intentions might be. He was tempted to ignore the request, to let the past stay buried. But his curiosity won out in the end. He wanted to know what had brought her back into his life after all this time. Set the meeting for tomorrow afternoon, he instructed his assistant. Whatever this was about, Alex would hear her out, but on his terms. The next day, Grace arrived at his office. She looked different from the woman he had seen at the bank, more reserved, her confidence seemingly diminished. Her usual haughty demeanor was gone, replaced by something softer, almost vulnerable. As she was escorted into Alex's office, Grace glanced around, taking in the modern, sleek design of the space, the framed awards on the walls, and the unmistakable aura of success that Alex now exuded. It was a stark contrast to the boy she had once known. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Grace began, her voice lacking the sharp edge it once held. She sat down across from him, her hands resting on her lap, fingers fidgeting slightly, betraying her nervousness. Alex remained silent for a moment, studying her. He had no intention of making this easy for her. "What do you need, Grace?" She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable under his scrutiny. "I'm here on behalf of my family's company," she said finally, her eyes meeting his. "We're in trouble, Alex. The cosmetics company, it's on the verge of bankruptcy. The market's changed, and we didn't adapt quickly enough. Our product lines are outdated, and the competition has completely overtaken us." As she spoke, Alex noticed how different she seemed from the Grace he remembered, the one who had once placed so much importance on status and success. Now, she was sitting before him, humbly asking for help. He didn't interrupt her, letting her continue. "My father's health has been declining, and with him no longer able to lead the company, it's been difficult," Grace admitted. "I've been trying to manage things, but I don't have the experience or the resources to turn it around. That's why I'm here. I need your help, Alex. I know we didn't part on good terms, and I'm sure you have no reason to want to help me after everything that happened, but I'm asking you to look beyond that." Alex watched her carefully, weighing her words. He had expected something like this, a plea for help, a request to use his influence and resources to save her family's business. But what surprised him was the tone of her voice, the way she openly admitted her own shortcomings. The Grace he remembered would never have been so candid, so vulnerable. For a moment, he considered rejecting her outright. After all, she had left him when he was at his lowest, abandoning him without a second thought. He owed her nothing. But as he looked at her now, he couldn't deny that she was genuinely trying to make amends. She wasn't the same person who had walked out of his life all those years ago. "I'm not asking for charity," Grace continued, sensing his hesitation. "If you agree to help, we'll compensate your company fairly. I know you're in a position to do things no one else can, and Carter Systems has the technology we need to modernize our products. I believe we can turn the business around, but not without your expertise." Alex leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. He had spent years rebuilding his life, carving out his own path without her. The idea of stepping in to save the very company that had once symbolized the life she had chosen over him felt ironic, to say the least. But Alex wasn't the type to hold grudges indefinitely, and part of him was intrigued by the challenge. "I'll need to see the financials," Alex said finally, his voice measured. "If I'm going to get involved, I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with." Grace's eyes lit up with hope. "Of course," she agreed quickly. "I'll have everything sent over right away." For the first time during the conversation, Alex saw a glimmer of the old Grace, the determination, the fire that had once driven her to always be the best. But this time, it wasn't fueled by arrogance or ambition. It was born from a genuine desire to save her family's legacy, to prove that she could rise to the occasion despite the odds. "I'll review the documents," Alex said, his tone neutral. "But I'm not making any promises." Grace nodded, understanding the conditions. "Thank you, Alex. That's all I'm asking for, a chance." As she stood to leave, Alex remained seated, watching her closely. He didn't offer her any reassurances, nor did he make her feel comfortable with the idea that this would be a simple favor. Grace had burned bridges before, and rebuilding them would take time and effort. But as she walked out of his office, Alex found himself considering the possibilities. The past may have shaped who they both were, but the present offered a new path, one that neither of them could have anticipated. Alex kept his word, reviewing the financial documents Grace sent over. The situation was as dire as she had described. The cosmetics company was bleeding money, and without a major overhaul, it was destined to fail within months. Yet, as Alex pored over the numbers and analyzed the market, he began to see potential where others might have only seen ruin. The company's brand still had recognition, and with the right strategy, it could be salvaged. After several meetings with Grace and her team, Alex decided to move forward. He committed Carter Systems resources to develop the technology her company needed to modernize its product line. The partnership wasn't a simple handout, it was a business venture, and Alex made it clear that he expected results. Grace, for her part, seemed determined to prove herself, not just to Alex but to her family and the industry that had once dismissed her. In the months that followed, the collaboration between their companies deepened. Alex's team worked closely with Grace's, developing a cutting-edge technology that would revolutionize her company's cosmetic products. It was a long, grueling process, but Grace was present every step of the way, often working late nights alongside Alex's engineers. This was not the Grace of the past, who had been content to let others do the heavy lifting while she enjoyed the fruits of their labor. She was different now, more focused, more humble, and more determined to succeed. As they worked together, Alex began to see a side of Grace that he hadn't noticed before, or perhaps that hadn't existed back then. She wasn't just the superficial socialite he had once known. Now, she was a capable leader, willing to get her hands dirty to save her family's business. Alex respected her growth, though he never allowed their personal history to interfere with their professional relationship. Grace's transformation didn't go unnoticed by others either. Slowly, the reputation of her family's cosmetics company began to recover. Industry insiders took note of the innovative products her company was developing, and with Alex's backing, new investors started to show interest. It was a slow but steady climb, and for the first time in years, Grace's company was not just surviving, it was thriving. Despite the long hours and the pressure of the collaboration, Alex and Grace maintained a strictly professional relationship. There were moments, however, where their shared history crept into the edges of their interactions. A glance here, a brief conversation about the past there. But they never allowed it to interfere with their work. Both had moved on from the pain of their younger years, though it was clear that the connection they once had still lingered, unspoken but not entirely forgotten. One evening, after a particularly successful product launch, Grace and Alex found themselves alone in a conference room, the rest of the team having left to celebrate. Grace, still in her work clothes, looked exhausted but content. She leaned back in her chair, watching as Alex packed up his laptop. "We did it," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "I didn't think we could, but we did." Alex glanced at her, nodding in agreement. "You worked hard for this," he said simply. "You earned it." There was a pause, the kind of silence that felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. Grace's eyes lingered on him for a moment before she spoke again, her voice softer this time. "I just wanted to say thank you, Alex. Not just for helping the company, but for giving me the chance to prove myself. I know I didn't deserve it after everything, but I'm grateful." Alex met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Grace. You took yours and made the most of it." For a moment, they sat there, the air between them filled with a quiet understanding. The years of hurt, of betrayal, seemed to fade in that instant, replaced by a mutual respect that neither had expected to find again. As time went on, the collaboration between Carter Systems and Grace's company continued to flourish. The technology Alex's team had developed became a cornerstone of Grace's new product line, propelling her family's business back into the forefront of the industry. Investors who had once written them off were now clamoring to get a piece of the action, and Grace's reputation as a capable leader grew. Professionally, Alex and Grace remained partners, but there was always the question of whether their past connection could evolve into something more. They never directly addressed it, but the possibility lingered in the background, unspoken yet undeniable. Years later, Grace stood at the helm of her family's cosmetics empire, having taken over as president after her father's passing. She had achieved everything she had set out to do, and more. Her company was thriving, and she had earned the respect of her peers and competitors alike. Yet, through it all, her partnership with Alex remained one of the most pivotal moments of her career. For Alex, the journey had been just as transformative. Helping Grace rebuild her company had not only been a smart business move, but it had also allowed him to close a chapter of his life that had once been filled with pain and regret. Now, there was no bitterness, no lingering resentment, only respect for the woman Grace had become. As they stood together at a corporate event one evening, years after their initial reunion at the bank, Grace and Alex exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had been through. Neither of them spoke, but their smiles said everything. The past had shaped them, but it no longer defined them. Together, they had built something stronger, something lasting. And perhaps, in some small way, they had found redemption, not just for their companies, but for themselves. 5 years had passed since Alex and Grace first rekindled their professional relationship, and much had changed. Grace Mitchell now stood as the president of her family's cosmetics company, a position she had once dreamed of but never thought she could truly achieve. Her rise to the top hadn't been easy, but she had worked relentlessly, learning from her mistakes and evolving as a leader. The company was no longer teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Instead, it had become one of the most innovative and successful brands in the industry, thanks in large part to the collaboration with Alex and Carter Systems. Grace's personal growth had been remarkable. The woman who once cared more about status and appearances had transformed into someone who understood the value of hard work and humility. She was respected by her peers and loved by her employees, many of whom had doubted her ability to lead at first. Now, there was no question, Grace Mitchell had earned her place at the helm. Alex had watched this transformation from a distance, playing his part in helping her rebuild the company, but never stepping too far into her personal life. He had moved on from the past, and his focus remained on Carter Systems, which had continued to thrive under his leadership. The technological advancements that his company had pioneered had not only revitalized Grace's business but also propelled Carter Systems into new markets, solidifying its position as a leader in the tech world. Despite the success of their companies, the personal connection between Alex and Grace remained complicated. They had worked closely for years, but the specter of their past still lingered in the background. Neither had ever spoken about what had happened between them all those years ago. There had been no apologies, no rehashing of old wounds. Instead, they had silently agreed to let the past stay buried, focusing on their professional relationship instead. But now, standing on the balcony of a luxury hotel in New York City during a corporate gala, the two found themselves alone for the first time in a long while. The night was cool, and the city lights twinkled in the distance as they leaned against the railing, each lost in their own thoughts. The event was a celebration of their latest product launch, a joint effort between their companies that had already been heralded as a major success. Grace glanced at Alex, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I didn't think we'd ever get here," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the distant sounds of the city. Alex turned to face her, his expression calm but thoughtful. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But you proved me wrong. You've come a long way, Grace." She nodded, accepting the compliment without her usual air of confidence. There was something more genuine about her now, a quiet humility that Alex had grown to admire over the years. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "You helped me when no one else would. I'll never forget that." Alex gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. "It wasn't about helping you, Grace. It was about helping your company. And you did the work. You earned everything you have now." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the years between them hanging in the air. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't entirely easy either. There was still something unresolved, something that neither had dared to confront. Finally, Grace spoke again, her voice soft and contemplative. "Do you ever think about the past? About what could have been?" Alex didn't answer right away. He looked out at the city, his thoughts drifting back to the days when they had been young and in love, before everything had fallen apart. He had spent so many years rebuilding his life, his company, his future. The hurt and betrayal he had once felt had long since faded, but the memories remained, like faint scars that no longer ached but still marked his journey. "Sometimes," he said finally, turning to meet her gaze. "But we were different people back then. Things happened the way they were supposed to." Grace nodded, her eyes glistening slightly in the dim light. "I guess you're right. We've both changed so much." There was a long pause, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the years between them were slipping away, leaving only the connection they had once shared. But just as quickly, reality settled back in, and both knew that their paths had diverged long ago. Alex smiled, a gesture of understanding rather than regret. "We're where we need to be now, Grace. You've built something incredible. I have too. And that's enough." Grace returned the smile, though there was a touch of sadness in her eyes. She had grown, matured, and achieved everything she had set out to, but there would always be a part of her that wondered what might have happened if things had been different. Still, she knew that Alex was right. Their lives had unfolded in ways that neither could have predicted, and they had both come out stronger for it. As the evening wore on, the two returned to the gala, each carrying with them the unspoken understanding that, while their past would always be a part of them, their future was set on different paths. They had found their redemption, not through rekindling old flames, but through rebuilding their lives and their legacies. And as they exchanged one final smile before parting ways, it was clear that they both carried a deep respect for the journeys they had taken, knowing that they had learned the most important lessons, not about love or loss, but about growth, resilience, and the strength to move forward. Alex Carter walked into the large, bustling lobby of Kensington Bank, the quiet confidence in his stride catching the attention of those around him. He was no longer the boy people once pitted or gossiped about. He was a man who had fought his way back from the brink, but none of that was visible on the surface as he made his way toward the bank's private offices. His expression was calm, composed, just another man going about his business. But to those who had known him years ago, there was a distinct air of power and success about him now, the kind that turned heads. Among those watching was Grace Mitchell, seated at one of the plush chairs near the front, sipping a cappuccino with her new boyfriend, Ryan Morgan. Grace spotted Alex the moment he walked through the door. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, recognizing him instantly, but she quickly masked her surprise with a smirk. "Look who it is," she said, nudging Ryan's arm. "Alex Carter. Still around, it seems." Ryan, oblivious to their history, glanced up casually. "Who?" "An old acquaintance," Grace replied, her voice dripping with condescension. She watched Alex approach, her smirk growing. "Looks like he's still trying to make it. Probably looking for a job or something." Ryan chuckled, eager to impress Grace. "Really? Well, he does have that just scraping by look about him." He leaned back in his chair, eyeing Alex with a mocking grin. "You know, Grace, not everyone can maintain their status after high school. Some people just fall behind." As Alex neared their table, Grace couldn't resist. "Alex," she called out, her voice loud enough to ensure he heard. "It's been a long time. What brings you here?" Alex stopped, turning to face her. His expression remained neutral, betraying nothing of the memories that flashed through his mind, memories of Grace and the life they once shared. He hadn't seen her in years, and the woman sitting before him now, dripping in designer labels, was a far cry from the girl he had once known. "Just here on business," Alex replied calmly, his tone polite but distant. He had no intention of engaging in whatever game Grace was playing. Grace raised an eyebrow, exchanging a glance with Ryan. Business, huh? Still trying to find your footing, I suppose. Ryan, picking up on Grace's mocking tone, jumped in. Yeah, it must be tough. You know, climbing your way up from wherever it is you are now. Alex's eyes flicked briefly to Ryan, taking in the man's smug expression, but he didn't bite. There was no need to prove anything to them, least of all to Grace. Instead, he simply nodded once, a faint smile on his lips. You could say that. Grace leaned back in her chair, satisfied with what she assumed was Alex's quiet defeat. Well, I'm sure you'll find something eventually, Alex, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Good luck. Alex remained composed, his expression unchanged as he met her gaze. Thanks, he said quietly, before turning and walking away. As he headed toward the private offices, Alex didn't spare another glance in their direction. He had no reason to. Grace could mock him all she wanted, but it didn't matter anymore. The boy she had once discarded was gone. The man who stood in his place had long since moved past the need for her approval or anyone else's. Behind him, Grace watched Alex's retreating figure, her smirk fading slightly. Ryan, still unaware of the significance of their exchange, shrugged it off, turning his attention back to his phone. But Grace couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about Alex, something she hadn't expected. As Alex continued through the lobby, he was greeted warmly by several bank employees, all of whom recognized him immediately. His arrival had not gone unnoticed by John Morgan, the president of Kensington Bank, who hurried out of his office to meet him. Mr. Carter, John said, his voice full of warmth and respect as he approached Alex. It's always a pleasure to see you. We weren't expecting you today. Alex shook John's hand, nodding politely. Just here for a quick meeting, John. Good to see you. Ryan, still seated with Grace, overheard the exchange and frowned, his earlier amusement giving way to confusion. Wait, he muttered under his breath, leaning closer to Grace. Did he just say Mr. Carter? As in Carter Systems? Grace's face paled slightly as the realization hit her. She had spent years dismissing Alex after their breakup, assuming he had faded into obscurity along with his family's fortune. But now, hearing his name spoken with such reverence, it became clear that Alex hadn't just survived, he had thrived. Yes, Grace whispered, her voice barely audible. That's him. Ryan stared after Alex, his earlier mockery replaced by a growing sense of unease. He had no idea that the man he had just taunted was the CEO of a company that held immense influence in the tech industry, and one of the bank's most important clients. As Alex finished his conversation with John and headed toward the private offices, he paused for a moment, turning slightly to glance back at Grace and Ryan. His expression remained calm, but there was a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. Without a word, he turned and disappeared into the bank's executive wing, leaving Grace and Ryan to sit in their uncomfortable realization. For Alex, the encounter had been nothing more than a brief moment in an otherwise ordinary day. But for Grace and Ryan, it was a stark reminder that the world had a way of turning the tables, and the people you least expect often end up on top. Thank you for listening, see you in the next episode. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Goodbye.